On a humid August morning in 2024, Detective Carlos Mendes stood in the climate-controlled evidence warehouse of the Miami-Dade Police Department, holding a small leather journal that had been sealed in an evidence box for 23 years. His hands were trembling slightly as he turned the pages, reading words that should have been read in 2000, words that would have changed everything. Words that proved the case solved in 2000 in Miami was not solved at all. In fact, the case everyone thought they understood was built on a lie so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that it had fooled prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, juries, and an entire city for more than 2 decades. The case was the murder of Rebecca Sullivan, a 29-year-old real estate agent who was found dead in a luxury condo in Coral Gables on March 15, 2001. Her husband, James Sullivan, had been convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He had maintained his innocence for 23 years, filing appeal after appeal, writing letters to anyone who would listen, insisting that he did not kill his wife. But the evidence against him had been overwhelming, or so everyone believed. But this journal that Detective Mendes held in his hands told a completely different story. A story that no one involved in the original investigation had ever imagined. A secret so shocking that when it was finally revealed, it would not just free an innocent man from prison. It would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Miami society. It would uncover corruption that had remained hidden for decades. Each would prove that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. What Detective Mendes discovered in that evidence box will leave you speechless. How this journal was overlooked for 23 years will infuriate you. And what happened when the truth finally came out will restore your faith that justice, no matter how long it takes, can still prevail. This is the true story of how one detective's routine evidence review uncovered a secret that rewrites an entire case, and how the real killer had been hiding in plain sight all along. Have you ever discovered that something you believed to be true for years was actually a lie? Have you ever learned that a person you trusted had been deceiving you all along? That is what this story is about. Deception, betrayal. In the moment when the truth finally destroys the carefully constructed facade, Rebecca Sullivan was living what appeared to be a perfect life in Miami in 2000. She was beautiful, successful, married to a wealthy businessman, living in a waterfront condo in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in South Florida. Rebecca had grown up in a working-class family in Hialeah, put herself through college, on her real estate license, and built a thriving career selling luxury properties to wealthy clients. She was ambitious, driven, and according to everyone who knew her, deeply in love with her husband James. James Sullivan was 42 years old in 2001, 12 years older than Rebecca. He owned a successful import-export business with offices in Miami, New York, and São Paulo. He had money, connections, influence. He had been married once before, divorced in the early 90s. When he met Rebecca at a charity gala in 1998, friends said it was love at first sight. They married 6 months later in a lavish ceremony at the Biltmore Hotel. By all outward appearances, they were the perfect couple. But on the morning of March 15, 2001, that perfect image shattered. James Sullivan called 911 at 7:42 in the morning, his voice frantic and broken. He told the dispatcher that he had just come home from a business trip to find his wife dead in their bedroom. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. What they found was a crime scene that would become one of the most talked about murders in Miami that year. Rebecca Sullivan was lying on the bed, fully clothed in the outfit she had been wearing the night before. She had been strangled with a silk scarf, her own scarf, which was still wrapped around her neck. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. Her purse was on the kitchen counter with cash and credit cards inside. Her jewelry was still in the bedroom. This was not a robbery. This was personal. The lead detective on the case was Marcus Green, a veteran homicide investigator with 25 years of experience. Detective Green and his team processed the crime scene with meticulous care. They collected fingerprints, fibers, DNA samples, photographs, everything standard in a homicide investigation. They interviewed neighbors, friends, business associates, family members. And very quickly, their focus turned to the husband, James Sullivan. In murder cases, especially when the victim is found in their own home, the spouse is always the first suspect. Statistics show that when a married woman is murdered, the husband is responsible in more than 40% of cases. As Detective Green dug deeper into the Sullivan marriage, cracks began to appear in that perfect facade. Friends reported that James and Rebecca had been arguing frequently in the months before her death. Financial records showed that James' business was struggling, that he had significant debts, that he had taken out a large life insurance policy on Rebecca just 6 months earlier, $2 million. Phone records showed that James had been in contact with a woman in New York. Dozens of calls and text messages in the weeks before Rebecca's death. When questioned, James admitted he had been having an affair. James Sullivan's alibi was that he had been in São Paulo on a business trip when Rebecca was killed. He said he had flown out on the morning of March 13th and was not scheduled to return until March 16th. But airline records showed something different. James had indeed flown to São Paulo on March 13th, but he had taken a return flight on March 14th, arriving back in Miami at 11:30 that night. He had gone directly to a hotel near the airport instead of going home. The next morning, he had driven to his condo, called 911, and reported finding his wife dead. When confronted with this timeline, James changed his story. He admitted he had returned to Miami a day early but said he stayed at the hotel because he and Rebecca had been fighting and he wanted to give her space. He said he went home the next morning hoping to reconcile. He did this when he found her dead, but investigators did not believe him. The timeline was too convenient. The motive was too clear. The affair, the insurance policy, the financial problems, the lies about his whereabouts, everything pointed to James Sullivan as the killer. The prosecution's theory was straightforward. James had flown back to Miami secretly on March 14th. He had gone to the condo latched that night while Rebecca was sleeping. They had argued. The argument escalated. James strangled his wife with her own scarf in a moment of rage. Then he left, stayed at the hotel, and came back the next morning to discover the body, playing the role of the shocked and grieving husband. The life insurance policy would solve his financial problems. The affair meant he had someone waiting for him once a respectable amount of time had passed. James Sullivan was arrested on March 20th, 2001, 5 days after Rebecca's death. He was charged with first-degree murder. His trial began in September of that year. The prosecution presented what they believed was an airtight case. Motive, opportunity, lies about his alibi. The jury deliberated for 2 days and returned a verdict of guilty. James Sullivan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Case solved. Justice served. Rebecca's family finally had closure, or so everyone believed. Can you imagine being convicted of murdering the person you love most in the world? Sitting in prison knowing you are innocent but being unable to prove it? How would you hold on to hope year after year? What would keep you fighting? Leave your thoughts in the comments. For the next 23 years, James Sullivan sat in a Florida state prison. He filed appeal after appeal, all of them denied. He maintained his innocence in every letter, every phone call, every visit with his lawyer. He admitted to the affair. He admitted to lying about his alibi initially. He admitted he had been a terrible husband in many ways, but he swore he did not kill Rebecca. He loved her. He had been planning to end the affair. He tried to save his marriage. He had no idea who had killed his wife or why, but no one believed him. The evidence was too strong. The case was too clear. James Sullivan was just another murderer claiming to be innocent, and the justice system had moved on to other cases, other crimes, other tragedies. But in 2024, the case that everyone thought was closed forever was about to be blown wide open. It started with a routine audit of the evidence warehouse. The Miami-Dade Police Department had implemented a new digital inventory system. Every piece of evidence from cases older than 20 years needed to be cataloged, photographed, and entered into the new database. It was tedious work, going through thousands of boxes, but it was necessary for modernizing the system. Detective Carlos Mendes had been assigned to the Cold Case Unit in 2022. He was 47 years old, a 20-year veteran of the force, known for his attention to detail and his refusal to accept easy answers. When he was given the task of reviewing evidence boxes from 2001 cases as part of the digital inventory project, he approached it with the same thoroughness he brought to active investigations. On August 12 th, 2024, Carlos opened evidence box number 143 from case Fili 200100892, the motto of Rebecca Sullivan. The box contained items that had been collected from the crime scene but had not been presented at trial. In criminal cases, investigators collect far more evidence than is actually used in court. Items that are not directly relevant to the prosecution case often end up sealed evidence boxes, catalogued but never examined in detail. Carlos began inventorying the contents of box 143, a pair of Rebecca's shoes that had been in the closet, a stack of mail from the kitchen counter, a laptop computer that had been examined for emails but then stored, a small leather journal, brown with a simple clasp, that had been found in Rebecca's nightstand drawer. Carlos opened the journal. It was a personal diary. Rebecca had been keeping it for about 8 months, based on the dates of the entries. The original investigators had photographed every page as a standard procedure, but according to the case notes, they had determined the journal contained nothing relevant to the murder investigation. Just personal thoughts, daily activities, nothing that implicated James or pointed to any other suspect. But Carlos, being thorough, decided to actually read the journal from beginning to end. Not just skim it, not just look for obvious references to the murder. Actually read it, the way you would read any book, to understand Rebecca as a person, to see her life through her own words. As Carlos read, he began to notice something strange, something the original investigators had completely missed. Something so shocking that Carlos had to read certain passages 3 and 4 times to make sure he was understanding correctly. Rebecca Sullivan had been keeping this journal to document a secret she was afraid to tell anyone. A secret that, if revealed, would destroy multiple lives. And as Carlos turned page after page, as the full scope of that secret became clear, he realized with growing horror that the case solved in 2000 in Miami was based on a complete misunderstanding of who Rebecca Sullivan was, what she had been involved in, and why she had really been killed. Do you see how critical it is to actually read evidence, not just glance at it? How many other cases might have been solved differently if someone had taken the time to truly understand what they were looking at? If this story is gripping you the way it gripped me when I first learned about it, hit that like button and subscribe, because what comes next is going to blow your mind. Carlos sat in that evidence warehouse for 4 hours reading every word of Rebecca Sullivan's journal. When he finished, he immediately called his lieutenant. He said he needed to reopen the Sullivan case. He said he had found evidence that had been overlooked, evidence that proved James Sullivan might be innocent, evidence that pointed to a completely different killer and a completely different motive. His lieutenant was skeptical. The Sullivan case had been closed for 23 years. James had been convicted. His appeals had been exhausted. What could possibly be a journal that had been photographed and reviewed by the original investigators? But Carlos was insistent. He said his lieutenant needed to read the journal personally, that he needed to understand what Rebecca had written, that everything about the case was wrong. The lieutenant read the journal, then he called the chief of police. The chief read the journal, then they called the Miami-Dade State Attorney's office. Within 48 hours, a meeting was convened with prosecutors, defense attorneys, and detectives. Everyone in that room read Rebecca Sullivan's journal cavar to cavar. So what was in that journal? What secret had Rebecca been documenting? What did she write that changed everything? This is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. This is where you will understand why this case had to be reopened and why everything everyone thought they knew about Rebecca Sullivan's murder was wrong. Rebecca Sullivan had been having an affair, but not with someone random, not with a colleague or a client. Rebecca had been having an affair with her husband's business partner, a man named Vitor Castillo. Vitor was James's closest friend. They had started their import-export business together in 1995. Vitor was the godfather to James's daughter from his first marriage. He had been the best man at James in Rebecca's wedding. He was family. The affair had started about a year before Rebecca's death, according to her journal entries. Rebecca wrote that she had never intended for it to happen, that she loved James, but James was always traveling, always working, always focused on saving the business. And Vitor was there. Vitor listened to her. Vitor made her feel seen and valued. The affair became serious. Rebecca wrote that she was falling in love with Vitor, that she was thinking about leaving James. But then Rebecca discovered something that changed everything, something that made her realize she was in terrible danger, something that would ultimately cost her life. E her journal entry dated February deste H. 2001, exactly 5 weeks before her death. Rebecca wrote that she had been at the office late one night, looking for a file in Vitor's desk with his permission, when she found documents that did not make sense, shipping manifests, financial records, names of companies she did not recognize. She was confused, so she started looking more closely. As she realized what she was seeing, evidence that Vitor Castillo was using the import-export business as a front for money laundering. Rebecca wrote that she confronted Vitor about it. Vitor admitted everything. He said he had been laundering money for a Colombian drug cartel for years, that James knew nothing about it, that the legitimate import-export business was just cavar for moving cartel money through fake invoices and shell companies. Vitor told Rebecca that she could not tell anyone, that if she went till the police, both she and James would be killed, that the cartel did not tolerate witnesses or loose ends. Rebecca was terrified. She wrote in her journal that she did not know what to do. If she told James, it would destroy him. His business, his reputation, his freedom, everything would be gone even though he was innocent. If she went till the police, the cartel might kill them both. If she did nothing, she would be complicit in criminal activity. She felt trapped, but Rebecca made a decision. She wrote in her journal on March 1, 2001, that she was going to end the affair with Vitor and tell James everything, that James deserved to know the truth, that they would go till the police together and let the authorities handle it. She wrote that she had scheduled a meeting with Vitor for March 14 to tell him her decision, that she was scared but that it was the right thing to do. March 14 2001, the day James Sullivan secretly flew back from São Paulo, the day Rebecca was murdered. Carlos Mendes read that journal entry and understood immediately what had happened. Rebecca had told Vitor she was going to expose him. Vitor could not let that happen, so Vitor had killed Rebecca, and because James had conveniently provided himself with a suspicious alibi by lying about his travel plans, because James had been having his own affair, because James fit the profile of the jealous husband with financial motive, Vitor had let James take the fall. The case everyone thought was solved in 2001 was based on a complete misunderstanding. James Sullivan had not killed his wife. Vitor Castillo had. Vitor had been walking free for 23 years while James rotted in prison for a murder he did not commit. But Carlos knew that a journal alone would not be enough to overturn a conviction. He needed more evidence. He needed to prove that Vitor Castillo had the opportunity to kill Rebecca. He needed to connect Vitor to the crime scene. He needed to build a case that would not only free James Sullivan, but also convict the real killer. Carlos and his team started digging into Vitor Castillo's life. Where was he now? What had happened to him in the 23 years since Rebecca's murder? They discovered that Vitor was still living in Miami, still running the import-export business, now entirely under his own control. After James's conviction, Vitor had bought out James's share of the business from James's family. He had become wealthy, powerful, connected. He sat on the boards of charities. He donated to political campaigns. He was respected in the Miami business community. But Carlos also discovered something else. In 2003, 2 years after Rebecca's murder, the Polícia Federal Norte-Americana had opened an investigation into Vitor Castillo's business, suspecting money laundering. But the investigation had been closed after 6 months with no charges filed. The official reason was insufficient evidence. But Carlos wondered if there was more to the story. Had Vitor paid someone off? Had the cartel protected him? Had evidence been destroyed or witnesses intimidated? Carlos reached out to the Polícia Federal Norte-Americana agent who had led the 2003 investigation. The agent, now retired, was named Patricia Ruiz. When Carlos explained why he was calling, Patricia was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that stunned Carlos. She said she had always believed Vitor Castillo was dirty, that the evidence pointed clearly to money laundering. But her investigation had been shut down from above. Someone in the Justice Department had killed the case. She never found out who or why. She always suspected corruption, that someone was being paid to protect Vitor Castillo. Patricia agreed to meet with Carlos. She brought her old casa e filhos. Everything she had kept after the investigation was closed. In those filhos, Carlos found what he needed. Financial records that showed large unexplained deposits into Vitor Castillo's personal accounts em 2001 em 2002. Cell phone records from March 2001 that showed Vitor's phone ping off towers near the Sullivan condo on the night of March 14th, the night Rebecca was killed. The original investigators had never requested Vitor's phone records. Why would they? Vitor was James's best friend and business partner. He had not been considered a suspect. He had not even been thoroughly questioned. Everyone assumed the husband was guilty. E Vitor had been smart enough to attend Rebecca's funeral, to comfort James, to act like the loyal friend grieving alongside the family. But now Carlos had evidence. The journal documenting Rebecca's affair with Vitor e her plan to expose his money laundering. Polícia Federal Norte-Americana financial records showing Vitor's connection to cartel money. Cell phone records placing Vitor near the crime scene at the time of the murder. Each was not airtight yet, but each was enough to demand a reinvestigación. Carlos presented his findings to the state attorney's office. After reviewing everything, after consulting with Polícia Federal Norte-Americana agents and forensic accountants and legal experts, the state attorney made a decision. The case solved in 2001 in Miami would be officially reopened. Vitor Castillo would be investigated as a suspect in the murder of Rebecca Sullivan. E James Sullivan's conviction would be reviewed for possible wrongful imprisonment. The news hit Miami like a hurricane. The Sullivan case, which had been front-page news in 2001, was suddenly front-page news again in 2024. James Sullivan, who had been in prison for 23 years, was suddenly at the center of a story that was even more shocking than the original crime. A business partner, money laundering, cartel connections, a secret affair, a journal that had been sitting in an evidence box for 2 decades. Can you imagine how James Sullivan felt when he learned that the journal existed, that Rebecca had documented everything, that if the original investigators had actually read the journal carefully, they might have realized Vitor was the real suspect? How many other innocent people are sitting in prison because evidence was overlooked or misunderstood? Shed your thoughts below. On October 13, 2024, Vitor Castillo was arrested at his office in downtown Miami. He was charged with the first-degree murder of Rebecca Sullivan, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of money laundering. His arrest was coordinated with a massive Polícia Federal Norte-Americana operation that took down an entire money laundering network connected to Colombian cartels. 17 people were arrested in Miami, New York, and São Paulo. Millions of dollars were seized. Vitor's business was shut down, all assets frozen. When Vitor was interrogated, he refused to answer any questions. He lawyered up immediately and never made a statement. But prosecutors did not need a confession. They had Rebecca's journal. They had Polícia Federal Norte-Americana financial records. They had cell phone data. They had testimony from a former cartel accountant who agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, stating that Vitor had been laundering money for years and that he had called a favor from the cartel to have Rebecca eliminated when she became a threat. Vitor Castillo's trial began in March of 2025. The evidence was devastating. The journal entries read aloud in court, Rebecca's own words describing her affair with Vitor, her discovery of his criminal activities, her decision to expose him, the cell phone records placing Vitor near the Sullivan condo on the night of the murder, the financial records showing millions in cartel money, the testimony of the cartel accountant describing how Vitor had requested Rebecca be killed and how the cartel had agreed because Vitor was too valuable an asset to lose. The defense tried to argue that the journal was not reliable evidence, that Rebecca might have been lying or exaggerating, that the cell phone records only prove Vitor was in the area but not in the condo, but the jury was not convinced. After 5 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Vitor Castillo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This same sentence James Sullivan had been serving for a crime he did not commit. In James Sullivan, on April 15, 2025, after spending 23 years, 7 months, and 15 days in prison for a murder he did not commit, James Sullivan walked out of the Florida correction system, afirmando. His conviction had been vacated. He had been formally exonerated. He was 67 years old now. He had entered prison at 44 with hope that his appeals would work. He was leaving at 67 having lost nearly a quarter century of his life. When James was released, he was met by his daughter from his first marriage, now 42 years old. She had been 19 when her father was convicted. She had grown up, gotten married, had children of her own, all while her father sat in prison. James met his grandchildren for the first time as afirmando. He wept as he held them, thinking about all the years he had missed, all the moments he would never get back. James Sullivan held a press conference 3 days after his release. He stood at a podium, flanked by his lawyers, and spoke for 20 minutes. He said he was grateful to be free. He said he was grateful to Detective Carlos Mendes for actually reading Rebecca's journal and understanding what it meant. He said he was grateful that the truth had finally come out. But he also said he was angry. Angry that he had lost 23 years. Angry that Vitor Castillo, a man he had trusted like a brother, had murdered his wife and let him take the blame. Angry that the original investigators had not read the journal carefully enough to understand what Rebecca was really documenting. James said he would be filing a wrongful conviction lawsuit against the city of Miami in the state of Florida. He said no amount of money could give him back the years he lost, but he wanted accountability. He wanted the system to acknowledge that it had failed, that sloppy detective working tunnel vision on the obvious suspect had resulted in a terrible miscarriage of justice. Rebecca Sullivan's sister, Monica Herrera, who had testified against James at his trial in 2001, issued a public apology. She said she had believed James was guilty, that the evidence had convinced her, that she had been certain justice was served, but now she knew the truth. Her sister had been killed by the man she was having an affair with, the man who was laundering drug money, the man who had been like a family. Monica said she would spend the rest of her life trying to make amends to James for believing he was guilty. The case of Rebecca Sullivan became a landmark example of why cold cases should never be considered completely closed. It became required training material for homicide detectives across Florida. The journal is now taught in forensic investigation courses as an example of why every piece of evidence must be thoroughly examined, not just cataloged and filed away. Rebecca's own words had been sitting in a box for 23 years, waiting for someone to actually read them and understand their significance. Detective Carlos Mendes was promoted to lieutenant and given a commendation for his work on the case. But when interviewed, Carlos said he was not a hero. He said he had just done what any good detective should do. Read the evidence, question assumptions, follow the leads wherever they go. He said the real hero was Rebecca Sullivan, who had documented everything in her journal, who had left a record of the truth, who had essentially solved her own murder from beyond the grave. So that is the story. That is what happened when the case solved in 2001 in Miami was reopened because unboxing evidence uncovered a secret that rewrites the entire case. A secret hidden in plain sight for 23 years. A journal that was photographed but not truly read. Words written by a murder victim that named her killer, described his motive. He explained everything. If only someone had taken the time to actually understand what she was saying. This case raises enormous questions about our justice system. How many other cases are based on incomplete investigations? How many other pieces of evidence are sitting in boxes, never properly examined? How many innocent people are in prison because investigators focused on the obvious suspect instead of following every lead? And how do we fix a system that allows such catastrophic mistakes? These are the hard questions without easy answers, but they are the questions we must continue asking. Because justice is not just about convicting someone. Justice is about convicting the right someone. And when we get it wrong, when an innocent person loses decades of their life, we have an obligation to make it right. What do you think about this case? Should the original investigators face consequences for not reading the journal thoroughly? Was it just an honest mistake or was it negligence? What do you think James Sullivan's life is like now after 23 years in prison? Can a person ever truly recover from that? And what about Vitor Castillo? He not only killed Rebecca but let his best friend take the fall. What does that say about him? I want to hear your thoughts on all of this. The comment section is open. I read every single comment. Cases like this generate real discussions about justice, about investigation techniques, about the importance of thoroughness and attention to detail. Do not hold back. Tell me what you really think. If the story affected you, if it made you think differently about how criminal investigations work, if it showed you the importance of never assuming a case is truly closed, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these important stories. Stories that are true. Stories that matter. Stories that teach you something about justice and truth in the price of getting it wrong. Subscribe to this channel because I am dedicated to bringing you more cases like this. Cases where new evidence changed everything. Cases where the truth was hiding in plain sight. Cases where dedicated detectives refused to give up. Yes, cases where the system failed and innocent people paid the price, but where ultimately justice prevailed. Share this video with someone who loves true crime, or someone interested in criminal justice reform, or someone who believes in the importance of thorough investigation work. This is a story that needs to be told widely, a story about failure and redemption, about secrets and truth, about how 23 years later, a journal can still speak and justice can still be served. In my next video, I am going to tell you about another case from the early 2000s where overlooked evidence finally came to light. But in that case, the victim was still alive, still fighting for justice, still waiting for someone to believe her. It is an incredible story about persistence and courage. I cannot wait to share it with you. Thank you for watching all the way till the end. Thank you for caring about these stories. Thank you for understanding that every case file represents real people whose lives were changed forever. Rebecca Sullivan deserved justice and she finally got it, even though it took 23 years. Jamie Sullivan deserved freedom and he finally got it, even though he lost decades of his life. And Vitor Castillo is finally facing the consequences of his crimes, even though he evaded them for far too long. The truth matters. Thorough investigation matters. Reading evidence carefully matters. And sometimes, when a detective takes the time to actually examine what is in an evidence box instead of just cataloging it, the truth reveals itself. Even 23 years later, even when everyone thought the case was closed forever, that is the power of never giving up on finding the truth. That is the importance of questioning, investigating, and being willing to admit when we got it wrong. And that is the story of how the case solved in 2001 in Miami was reopened. How unboxing evidence uncovered a secret that rewrites the entire case, and how justice, though delayed by more than 2 decades, finally prevailed. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.